Money's not everything. I learned this when I crossed paths with Fred. I'm a nurse, and I've been doing my best to achieve the zenith of my career. The story of my life took a new narrative one day while I was at the hospital observing my night shift. The ambulance rushed into the premises, and a man in his late 70s was brought in on the stretcher. His wife and grandson accompanied him because he had suffered a heart attack. It was Fred's granddad, and he was rushed to the ICU, while Fred and his grandmother remained in the waiting area. His grandmother believed him for the condition of his granddad, and she threatened to disown him if anything happened to her husband, his grandfather. I wondered what Fred would have done to his granddad, and it was later on, when his grandfather was discharged, that I got a proper understanding of what was going on. I took on the job to take care of Fred's granddad at home. I needed the extra cash, and his grandfather was on his way to recovery, and though Fred was doing everything to make him happy, his grandfather did not want to talk to him. I learned from other staff at home that Fred's parents had passed away, and his grandparents had taken him in. Well, Fred lived a wild life, and it's been a concern to his grandparents who could not discard him as he was only surviving seed that they had. Fred and his grandfather had gotten into an argument the night that he had gotten a heart attack, and it was because of Fred's wild lifestyle. Fred, from what I've heard, lived a carefree life and spent his grandfather's money on women and parties, and this had always been an issue of concern for the family. The things which I heard about Fred did not correspond with the things that I saw. He was always at home trying to please his grandfather, except when he was at his grandfather's firm, managing the activities that went on there. I'd say he did this for 3 months, and his grandparents began to be pleased with the new Fred, as they called it, especially by the fact that no loose women were coming around the house to look for him. Fred started to make advances at me during this time, and I didn't want to get mixed up with him because of things I heard. And I only wanted a professional relationship with his family for as long as I took care of his granddad. My business with him concluded within a few months' time, and I guess you could say Fred won my heart. He proposed to me, and though I was skeptical about accepting his proposal at first, he assured me that he was a changed man, and even suggested that I give him the opportunity to prove it. I did, and he officially took me to introduce me to his grandparents as his fiancé. His grandparents were super elated. They noted right in my presence that it was best decision Fred has ever made in the recent years besides quitting his immoral lifestyle. His grandfather noted that the fact that he was willing to spend the rest of his life with a lady like me, it meant that he was truly changed. They promised to support us in whatever way we needed them to, and the wedding preparation was underway. Fred approached me to make a demand. He wanted us to sign a pre-nuptial agreement, just to protect his property and whatever he was going to get from his grandfather. Well, I was startled by what he said. Why would he need to protect his property and inheritance from me? Well, he pleaded with me to see things from his point of view, as he noted that though his grandparents loved me for my homeliness and all, they wanted to be sure that I was not getting married to him because of money. It did not sound like his grandparents, but I did not give much thought to it. So I agreed to sign the documents, and besides, if I did refuse, it would have projected me as someone who was indeed money-hungry. I informed Fred before our wedding that I was career-driven and not willing to put my career aspirations aside just to become a full housewife, and he was okay with it. He noted that he was not going to demand it from me, as he equally loved the fact that I was actually working, and not just depending on him for money. We got married 3 years ago and had a set of twins shortly after. We were all living in peace until recently when Philomena, a sales agent, showed up at the doorstep with a baked cake and a seductive smile. Philomena had moved into our neighborhood, and in a bid to get acquainted with our neighbors, she visited us. We welcomed her into our home and we talked for a bit. I did not pick much up from what she had said, besides the sales agent part. We appreciated the gesture of goodwill, I'm talking the cake, but there was just something off about her, and I was not comfortable with it. I sensed that she was onto my man. There was no concrete evidence per se, but this is just a woman's intuition, and women are usually right about these kind of things, you know. Each time we would ask her a question, she would smile at my husband, feel at home, and give the answer. For someone who was visiting for the first time, she was too damn comfy. Philomena left our home, and my husband commented that she was such a nice lady. I immediately expressed my dislike for her, and he was shocked because I'm very accommodating of a person who does not easily turn people away. He asked what in the world she could have done to me to get me to dislike her so much, and I told him that she had her eyes on him. Fred starts to laugh at me like I had said something absolutely ridiculous and stupid. After about a minute, he asked how I knew, and I simply told him that it was my gut instinct. Fred resumed his laughter, and after he was done, he tells me that I was simply paranoid about an innocent lady who just wanted to be friendly. I still stood my ground, not comfortable around her, but Fred assured me that I had absolutely nothing to worry about. He promised to cut her off once he observed a little portion of my suspicion to be true. I took Fred and his word and tried not to get myself all worked up because of this lady. Things went on smoothly in my home recently. Now, I got promoted to the position of head nurse in the hospital where I worked a month ago. It was like a milestone for me in my career when you consider my age. Other qualified nurses for the position are much older than me. I announced my promotion to my husband over breakfast. He was happy for me, and I told him that, though this position came with its benefits and demands, they're higher. And this was because I knew that there would be days when I might not seem as available as I used to be. Fred seemed understanding of it, and he said, "Oh, that's okay." I resumed duty as the head nurse, and it was harder than I had imagined it to be. It took all of my time because I was trying to impress the management that had placed me there. I gave the job my all, but I was summoned by the management yesterday, and I was told that I was not ready to handle the position yet. I tried to ask for more time, but they are the ones who called the shots. Someone else was brought in as an interim, and I was to observe very closely how the person performed, and perhaps I could be reinstated in the future. I won't lie, losing this position was too much for me to handle because I'd worked so hard to achieve it, and worse still, I knew that the promise to have me reinstated in the future was just a way to soothe me and nothing more. I took a half-day's leave that afternoon, and I got home where I felt I could succor and just forget about the disappointing day that I had at the hospital. But I stumbled upon my husband and our neighbor in the parlor chit-chatting. There was a bottle of wine, which was almost empty, and it seemed as though they were having a nice little chit-chat. Seeing Fred and Philomena just added to my frustration for the day, especially after the fact that she was all over him. Fred was surprised that I was back at the house at this hour, and he asked if anything was wrong. I told him that I'd been replaced as the head nurse, and he said, "Oh, that's sad, but I'll be fine." And he just resumed his discussion with our neighbor. If what Fred had said and how he had acted had come from someone else, then it would have been fine, but he's my damn husband, and I expected more. I went to the bedroom, but I heard their laughter, and I was just pained all the more. I did my best to ignore it, but I failed. So I was back at the parlor within 5 minutes, demanding that Philomena leaves, as there was something really important and private that my husband and I need to deal with. Well, Fred looked very surprised at that and asked if we could deal with the issue later, but I noted, no, it's a matter of serious issue and urgency, and Philomena immediately excused herself and left to her house. Fred asked what the hell the issue is, and I said that he was the one having the problem. He looked at me in utter shock, and I gave him explanations before he could even ask about it, and I pointed out that he had acted insensitively upon learning that I had been replaced as the head nurse. I noted that he glossed it over like it was not something of a serious thing, and was quick to resume his good time with the neighbor, whom I had clearly said made me uncomfortable, and Fred responded by saying that Philomena was not the reason I had lost my job and that I did not feel comfortable with her. Which did not mean that she was not going to be welcomed in the house. I was just already frustrated, and my patience was already stretched to the limit. So my emotions, not my head, my emotions, were responsible for the things that came out of my mouth. And I told Fred that he was talking the way he did because Philomena was all over him, and he enjoyed it. I mean, this lady was supposed to be a sales agent, eh? As she claimed. So what was she doing in the house, our home, during work hours when she's supposed to be out there making a living, in the field trying to close deals? I told Fred that this lady was trying to sell something to him, duh, and it was not a product of commodity. My voice was over the roof, as they would say, but I was so mad to notice, and it was then there was a knock on the door that I got a grip of myself. It seemed that our neighbor has been drawn to the disturbance coming from our home, so I opened up the door, and standing right there was the root of our argument itself, Philomena. She said that she had come to check if everything was all right, and I was not about to just bring her into this, even though she was technically the center of it already. I told her we're good. But my husband immediately storms out of the house in anger, and it was indicative of the fact that we were having issues. Philomena asked again if everything was okay, and I told her that I wanted to be alone, before I slammed the door in her face. I mean, can you blame me? My husband has not come home since yesterday, and though I'm a bit concerned, I'm not going to reach out to him because it would make me look like the villain when all I'm trying to do is not let some random girl break up my marriage. Let him come home whenever his madness is over. I'll be right here. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Oh, man. Let me know in the comments if you think Philomena is up to something. I do have 2 comments from the original post we'll check out right now. But first, guys, if you're not subscribed to the channel, it does support us so much. All you have to do is click that subscribe button, and immediately after that, click those bell notifications. Here's comment 1. It says, OP stood up for herself and her relationship, which is great. Losing a job is tough, but instead of letting it get her down, she talked to her husband about it, and she made it crystal clear that she wasn't comfortable with her neighbor. And when things get to be too much, she took action to protect the marriage. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's pretty strong. Comment 2 says, oh, man. OP's reaction seemed a bit over the top and straight up paranoid. Losing a job sucks, but getting all suspicions of her husband and neighbor without real proof, that's a bit much. Confronting her husband in front of the neighbor and slamming the door in her face, well, that's not the best way to handle things. It could just make things worse in their relationship. But I guess we'll find out. Update number 1. My husband has returned, but his sanity is not, and it's intensified. Fred came home 3 days ago, and the kids had already gone to bed, so they couldn't even see their father. It was a good thing, I'd say, because Fred, who came home, was not the one that I married. The man who walked through that door that evening was the person who had caused his father to have a heart attack. Remember that? With his little living that he was doing, and I could perceive the strong stench of alcohol on him the moment I opened up the door. I greeted him, but he just walked past me without even responding, and I guess instead of a greeting, he was expecting an apology. Well, I was going to respect him as my hubby, but I was not willing to apologize for stating the oblivious. Maybe it was my ego or not, I don't know. I followed him to the room to ask if he wanted me to get him something for dinner. But Fred ignored me. He took off his shoes and laid on the bed like a pack of playing cards, and I felt stupid to have even offered him dinner. And I made up my mind to give him the space that he was obviously clamoring for. Fred left the house early the next morning before the kids even woke up, and he didn't tell me where he was off to. I did not care, as I had already made up my mind to give him some space. I guess I did, because Fred returned home that evening, and I was with the kids in the sitting room. The moment they saw him, they ran towards him, but he ignored them and walked straight to the bedroom. I was obviously pained by Fred's display. I mean, how could he be keeping the kids at a distance because we're having some issues? I get it that it's normal for couples to have their squabbles, but it's wrong for either of them to take it out on the children. The kids soon drifted to sleep in the sitting room right there, and I carried them to their bedroom one by one, before going to confront old Fred. He was taking the whole thing too far, and that was just foolish of him. I mean, I walked to the room, and Fred did not acknowledge my presence, and he was just fixated on his phone. I told him, "We need to talk, buddy." He replied that he had nothing to say to me. Well, I don't care. I had quite a few things I need to say to him. So I began to talk. I wanted to verbally tear him to shreds for dragging our kids into a misunderstanding that we were having, but I decided to take the route of peace, tranquility. I told Fred that we needed to put an end to the squabble, which we had, and at least for the sake of the children, but Fred replied that the only issue at hand was me trying to dictate his lifestyle for him, and he went ahead to say that I wanted to be the man in the marriage, and he was not going to have that. I knew where he was going with this, so I apologized to Fred if I had disrespected him, but I tried to point out how hurt I was, and I lost the position of the head nurse, coming home wanting to find some sort of peace in my husband, only to discover that he was more interested in the company of a woman who was drooling over him. Fred immediately got offended and began to say that I was acting as though he had cheated on me with a Philomena, when all he did was be friendly with her and nothing more. He put on his pants and his shirt, and even though it was late in the night, he walked out the door. He didn't come back home that night, and he refused to even answer the phone. It's been a day or two since I've heard or saw him, and I'm considering taking the whole issue right to his grandparents. If anybody can call my husband to order, it's definitely going to be them. I know you might not be in support of me taking the matters of my home to my in-laws, but what do you do when you're in my shoes? Update number 2. Things have grown worse between my husband and me, and I fear that I may have been the cause. I visited my in-laws just as I noted in my last update. I did not hide my frustration at the whole thing, and I broke down in tears several times as I narrated to my in-laws that my marriage was on the path to collapse because of a lady who had recently moved into our neighborhood. His grandmother was sympathetic, and the first thing that came out of her mouth was, "He has started again." His grandfather was born sympathetic and mad, and he repeatedly asked me if I was certain of the things that I said, and after I had replied in the affirmative, he said his grandson had become more foolish than he used to be as a single man. Fred's granddad called him right there, but he didn't tell him what I was with him. He tells Fred that it's been a while since he saw his great-grandkids, and so he wanted to have a little get-together that Sunday. He asked that Fred bring his family, me and the children, to his home on Sunday. The phone was on loudspeaker, and I heard Fred lie to his grandfather, saying that he and I planned a weekend getaway to celebrate the anniversary of when we first met. I immediately signaled to his grandpa that it was a lie, and he insisted that Fred and I postpone the getaway. Which, by the way, Fred claimed that we had eagerly been looking forward to. His father tells him that he could even still make the trip once we were done at their place, since the get-together would only be for a few hours. If Fred had not worked for his grandfather, then I'm sure he would have used work as a perfect excuse. But he could not, so he promised his grandfather that his family would be there on Sunday. And I went back to the house, and Fred returned home later that night. Well, I greeted him, and his only response to my greeting was, my grandfather demands that you and the kids come over on Sunday. It's going to be for a family get-together. I played dumb as if I did not know what was happening or what would happen, and Sunday strolled on, and rather than drive us down to his grandfather's place as a family, he asked that I take the kids there and he would join us shortly. Well, I didn't bother myself as I knew the kind of backlash that waited his grandparents' house. He finally shows up at his grandparents' home and blamed the high level of a traffic jam for his late coming. We were all at the parlor except for the kids, who were being watched over by the staff in the room, and Fred's granddad asked what the issue was between him and me and some sales agent's neighbor. The moment the question was thrown at him, he looked at me in displeasure. His grandfather immediately called his attention for an answer, and Fred said that there's no issue, except for the fact that I wanted him to be hostile for no just cause to a neighbor that had recently moved into our area. Fred's granddad asked him to tell him about this neighbor whom I did not like, and Fred began to dish out a lot of information that I was embarrassed my husband knew so much about. I mean, this lady, within this short amount of time, she had moved into the area, and he then wrapped it up by saying that my insecurities had this toxicity towards him for not antagonizing the lady I felt was a threat. Even though he was not giving me any reason to suspect, that he was cheating on me with her. His grandmother cut in and she just said a few things that were going on in my mind. She said that Fred was supposed to be ashamed for knowing so much about this said lady, and she pointed out the fact that he would only have known so much in a short while because he must have spent a lot of time with her. Fred still tried to defend the lady, but it was then that his grandfather now shut him up. He blasted him for letting a total stranger, who had moved into our area barely a few months ago, by the reason why our relationship was strained. He told Fred that even if the sales agent lady was innocent and all, wisdom demanded that he kept her at arm's length since his marriage and family were threatened by it. He demanded that Fred do what was necessary to ensure that our home remained at peace. Fred promised his grandparents that he would do just as they said, but his promises were so empty. He was the one who drove us back home, and he did not say a word to me throughout the journey. He was so mad that I reported him to his grandparents, and we got home that day, and the only ones he spoke to were just the kids. I prepared dinner, but he refused to eat. He didn't talk to me for the next 2 days, and I could not call his grandparents to tell them about it because of part of the reason why I resentment towards me was the heightened reason that I got them involved. I decided that I was going to take another direction in restoring our strained relationship, so I discussed it with a friend. She promised to have the kids spend the weekend at her place while I give my husband a special kind of treatment. Wink, wink. Fred went on a Saturday morning out, and I knew that his return would be the evening, so I took advantage of the time to prepare and set up a romantic dinner. I made sure the atmosphere was so ambient, and I prepared to give him a steamy dinner. When I suspected that he would be coming back, I bathed. I applied my makeup, and I put on some lingerie, and I waited for my hubby. Fred came strolling back later than he usually did, and though I was a bit tired, I was willing to do anything to save the marriage. I welcomed him with a smile at the door, and he came into the house, and though he noticed everything was in place, he did not seem interested. He just sat on the couch, right there, with his eyes closed even. And, I prepared a warm bath for him, and I came from behind the couch where he sat to tell him all about it. I placed both hands on his shoulders and started to gently massage him, while telling him, with a voice that suggested I had other things equally planned for the night, about the bath that I prepared. Fred immediately sat up like the electricity has been fired to his body, and he flung my hands away from his shoulder. He looked at me in the eyes and said I disgusted him before walking out of the door and banging it shut. I stood there in my lingerie as hot tears flowed down my cheeks. The matter has certainly got out of hand. It's been a few days since I last heard from him, but I've refrained from calling his parents. To be honest, I don't even know what they would do to save the marriage at this point. I mean, what would you do? Update number 3. This is the final update of the story. I'm currently divorced. That's right. So don't tell me that you did not see that coming, because after the embarrassment that Fred had given me the night when I tried to spice things up between us, I went the next day to pick my kids up at my friend's place, where they stayed, and we had a lengthy discussion. My friend told me that I should have confronted the source of the problem in the first place. She noted that any man would be offended with his wife calling him out of his family or in public, and what I could have done was to confront Philomena behind my husband and warn her to keep her distance from my man and my family. My friend noted that my husband might have been entangled in something with a sales agent, and she advised that I visit her. I did what my friend said, and the result, oh boy, was it shocking. So I went to Philomena's house for the first time, and she opened up the door after I knocked for a while. I could see that she was putting on just a large male shirt that covered her pants, and she looked somewhat surprised to see me. She feigned a smile and said that she never expected to see me at her doorstep, but she was glad that I came. Well, if she was, then I could not understand why she did not invite me inside. Well, I told her that I wanted to discuss something really important with her, but she just asked me that I come back another time, and I was trying to be insistent when I heard the voice of a man from inside calling her babe, and asked why she was taking so long, and I immediately recognized that voice. It was my husband, Fred. So I shoved Philomena aside and barged in, and I found Fred putting on just a pair of boxers. I was mad, but he did not show any remorse. He verbally tore me to shreds as I called him shameless for cheating on me. Fred said that he had left the house because he could no longer stand me and my toxicity, and he did not feel sorry for whatever he did and whatever I just discovered. So Fred went ahead and tells me that he never loved me. The only reason he has gotten married to me and not Philomena was because he saw how pleased his grandparents were with me whenever they talked about the ideal of kind of life we would have. I was trying so hard to process his statement, and my heart raced as my head equally banged. The implication of what he just said was that, he had known Philomena before he even met me. I was still trying to digest the bitter pill as I turned to Philomena, but her facade immediately changed. She tells me that she was tired of watching me act like I owned her man, when he was never mine to begin with. She admits that when Fred had married me years ago just to rise in the eyes of his grandparents, who were going to die and leave the inheritance to him. The act of Fred had infuriated Philomena, which is why she left the country and went on a long trip. Later, when she returned, she did not try to reach out to Fred for so long until they bumped into each other just a few months ago. After he assured her of his intention behind marrying me, she forgave him and she consciously moved into our neighborhood just to be close to Fred. So, I didn't know what to do. What could I have done? Beat them up? I told Fred that I was done with this marriage, and he said that I could go ahead and divorce him, but he was not bothered because the pre-nuptial agreement, which is why we already signed it and ensured that whatever his is going to remain his. I didn't care. I just ran out of the house and I cried straight to my in-laws' place and I told them everything. And they had me and the kids move in with them while they sent me for their grandson. Fred showed up at his grandparents' place with them while they sent for their grandsons. Philomena shows up, but they did not come to beg. He immediately admitted that everything that I had said was true and he was done putting up with my toxicity. He even told his grandparents to let him handle the affairs of his home, as he was old enough to do so, and his grandfather immediately fired Fred from the company, just like that, right there, on the spot. Fred tried to protest and tell his grandparents that they were picking the side of a lady over their son, but they told him that the lady was the mother of their grandbabies, and since he was old enough to handle his affair, then he was equally old enough to make his own money. You would think that was all right. Oh no, it was only the beginning. Fred's grandfather told him that he was taking him off his will and he was making me the sole heir of all that could have been his. It turned out that the prenuptial agreement that we signed was useless after all because, Fred didn't own anything. Fred was mad and he started yelling at his grandparents, and I was shocked to see that side of Fred. I could have never imagined that he would shout out his grandparents like this. His grandparents threatened to call the law. But Fred was showing no signs of slowing down as he tried to reach me with a rage in his eyes that was evident enough to tell me that he could hurt me that instant. I picked up a vase for self-defense, of course, but then the grandparents' neighbor rushed to our place. I realized that Fred's grandma had called the cops, and the neighbor, since they were good friends. The neighbor was an ex-policeman who was still stronger than Fred, and he tackled Fred and held him to the ground until Fred gave up. Before he could say anything, his grandparents had him and Philomena thrown out of the house with a warning to never show their faces again. Our divorce was finalized yesterday, and he'll be paying child support from now on. Philomena can keep him for all I care. He doesn't measure up to half of a man. I'm sure she'll leave him soon because he's literally struggling to find a proper job. And knowing the lavish taste of his woman, he won't be able to hold her down for very long. But I don't care about them now. All I want to say is thank you to everyone who's helped me out throughout the comments and supporting me. Oh boy. Here, guys, 2 comments from the final update, and some of these comments are not happy. Comment number 1 says, "Wow, OP. You showed incredible strength and resilience in such a difficult situation. It takes a lot of courage to confront the source of problems head on, especially when it involves confronting your ex-husband and his mistress. Your decision to seek out Philomena and uncover the truth, it speaks volumes about your determination to take control of your life. And reaching out to your in-laws for support was a very smart move. It's heartwarming to see them stand by your side and prioritize your well-being and that of your children. Anyways, I wish you luck. Comment number 2 says, OP, while your fiery confrontation might make you have a juicy drama, I guess, some may argue it was a tad impulsive. Barging into Philomena's house like that, a detective on a mission could have escalated things unnecessarily. Plus, airing your marital dirty laundry to your in-laws, come on, it might put them in a very awkward spot. While it's totally understandable to be hurt and angry, some might suggest a more strategic approach, girl, like seeking legal advice or counseling. Come on, you're an adult. To navigate the divorce and custody battle with a bit more finesse. But hey, everyone loves a good plot twist, am I right? Good luck, OP.